Joining me now are the director who adapted the story to the film, Anthony Minghella, two of the film's stars, Nicole Kidman and Jude Law. I am pleased to have each of them back at this table. Welcome back. Great to see you. Great to see you. Tell me about how you got involved with this, because when Fraser was here talking about the book, you guys were already having conversations. You had never been to North Carolina. You didn't like cold weather.
Hate mountains.
Hate mountains.
Know nothing about
the outside world. You know, don't know the difference between a horse and a cow.
Oh,
a chicken and a pig.
I'm sorry. I felt like such an interloper. You know, I mean,
Ada was you.
Yes, exactly. You know, I write on a farm in England.
I know.
It's a little cottage I have. It's surrounded by farmyard and animals. And I was in this house. I've got my music and my piano, my sketchbook and my books, and looking out of the window and seeing the real world going on. And I thought, this is a story I have to tell, because I have to get out of this house and go and find out what's going on in the fields. And listen, I'd given an interview a week before I read this book saying I would never do another big literary adaptation. And then 4 copies of this book arrived within a week.
One from Michael Ondaatje.
One given to me in Toronto by Michael Ondaatje.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'll open it. And I opened it, and then I fell into it. I think it's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read.
Because?
Because it speaks to so many things. You know, there was an Inman, there is a cold mountain, there was such a journey, but it's also the Odyssey. So it's got this mixture of reality and fable, because there's this wonderful sense of voyaging into the spirit as well as voyaging across a country. And also in the center of it is an extraordinary love story, but also another kind of love story between 2 women. And so I think the fact that there was the opportunity to sort of have this huge romantic yearning in the film, but also this actually funny and refreshing and invigorating relationship between 2 women, because unusually, instead of having a story where there are 2 women fighting over a guy, or 2 women who are jealous of each other or not supportive, it's about 2 women healing each other and transforming each other. So they have a tiny journey in terms of geography, a huge one in terms of the spirit, and then Inman and this voyage home, and it's got basically it's got everything. How could you possibly say no to that novel?
How do you see it? I mean, this story.
No, beautifully put by Anne.
Yes.
I mean, for me, it was primarily I wanted to make a film about a love. So it was that simple to say yes to.
The pull of a love that powerful. I mean, should we not all feel that strength?
And within, I mean, I think the thing that we were most concerned about was, will people believe that with these fleeting moments, you know, that these 2 people will wait for each other? Well, one will return and one will wait.
That is the amazing thing about it. There's a brief meeting at the beginning of the film. At first, the opening scene was this extraordinary tale of the Battle of Petersburg, and then Jude decides to go, but they flash back to that 3 months before when they had this one brief meeting. And well, you say to an audience, you know, something's going to happen at the end of the film, and you know they're going to come together in some way, but there's a lot that goes on, and the love is primarily in the respective hearts.
And in the memory, which I think is, you know, suddenly these moments, like a hand touching or a sort of a glance, or you know, 3 or 4 words passed between them, take on such relevance because they're played over and over and over in their heads, which I think we can all relate to. Did she say that? Did he really say that? Did he look at me like that? Did he? Didn't he? Oh, you know, that
I
sort
think
of
I remember
longing.
Fraser saying, Charles Fraser, the author of Cold Mountain, saying that his grandfather told him the story of a soldier at Petersburg who had deserted. Right?
I think it's based on one of his ancestors, a real Inman.
Yeah.
Well, that's extraordinary, because it's also the name, it's Inman and it's also Everyman. This is a strange conundrum of that name, because it's a real name, and it just refers, it seems to me, to all these other literatures. The idea of everybody having this kind of moment in their heart.
Tell me who Inman is, other than the ancestor of the author. He's a young man who goes off to war, having met briefly a woman, and it's in 1864, the Battle of Petersburg in July.
He's also as a man, in Cold Mountain, he's a bit of an eccentric in a way, and almost cursed with enough education to have a sort of imagination and a poetry to him, to his sort of inner feelings, but not enough to necessarily feel confident with words, or confident with at least confident with being able to talk to Ada.
Yeah. I mean, in the beginning.
At the beginning.
Yeah. What's essential about his character is that there is a quietness about him.
I think when
More
you
than-
meet
more than action.
When you meet Charles Frazier and you see this very discreet, very reserved, very shy, and extremely poetic man, you see where this character has emerged from. It's an enormously sophisticated man, Charles, and somehow, but a simple man. And I think that Inman shares that in common, this reluctance to invest in words. And Jude said a very funny thing to me. He said, I spent all this time learning an accent, all this time working on the sound, and then I realized I only had a couple of dozen words in the entire movie to say.
Yeah, there is an irony here. We're talking about, something that's universal, love and remembrance and memory. But we're also talking about something else that's universal, which is war, and how war turns out to be nothing like anyone ever imagined, and that there is something else about the war beyond the battle. It's what's happening at home. Lives are affected and touched and destroyed and everything else. But you are three people who are not Americans giving life to this most incredible part of our history. Anything to be said about that?
The wonderful
it required people of your talent to do it, is what we might say.
I think what it says to me is, if the film has a silent plea, it is for the United Nations. It is for people banding together, not because of color or creed or class or passports. And I think what's wonderful about the movie world is that it's already got to that place in a peculiar way. Hollywood's been very generous to the people it's vacuumed up from around the world and invited in. And if you come onto my film set and you know my films, you'll hear Italian, French, German, English, Australian, New York. It's an international community. And I think that what's wonderful about actors is that actors are not circumscribed by their identity or their past.
They're boundaryless.
They're boundaryless, and they're gypsies, and they go out and they find these creatures, or they find them within themselves. And I think it's a wonderful thing that actually, if you go to Britain right now, there are Americans playing British roles, there are Australians playing American roles, and it's a much more fluid world than the one which brings us into conflict with each other.
It's an interesting thing. That's been true about the cinematic world for a while. I mean, because of boundaries, actors, but the whole world is beginning more like that it is boundaryless because of the internet and all kinds of means of communication. We are all parts of a whole range of people are parts of multiple places, and that there are people from a variety of places that now, touch each other. When you decided to do this, Sidney Pollack was one of the producers. Do you start with the script before you select the characters, or are you going to write your script after you have decided that Nicole is my Ada and that Jude is my Inman?
Well, the humiliating truth of this is that when I'm writing, I'm everybody.
You're all the characters yourself.
If you came into my room, you would laugh at me seeing me working, because I'm just, at one point I found myself in the scene where Jude is with Dame Eileen Atkins and he's finally opening up for the first time. It became so intense for me, and I was writing alone for week after week after week, and I went out into the fields and I found myself putting my hands in the ground. I was so earthed at that moment, and then I emerge after a long time with a screenplay, and there's that shocking moment where you realize that other people are going to be doing these parts, and you have to go and find them. And I think it's very interesting that this is the second time I've worked with Jude, and I have this awful feeling that of the Beauty and the Beast, that I'm the sort of ugly background person who's found this man to stand in for him in some odd way, the sort of perfect man on screen, while I'm lurking like an ogre off screen.
Perfect man, and he gives expression to it.
Thank goodness, because I've got nothing. I've got nothing to say. I desperately need these words to be able to express myself.
But you had not worked with Nicole before.
No, I'd love
Yeah,
to.
but was he Ada?
You had not loved
I'd
me.
loved her from a
She what?
distance.
That's so not true.
Not true. You mean you wanted to work with him and you never
Now he
called?
starts to look
Never
nervous.
Listen,
What?
you know, we did
No,
this
he
thing
said
the other
that
day.
nothing about me interested in him prior to meeting me.
You are such a
Oh,
liar.
come on, that's true.
Here we
isn't it?
go.
He
This
did
is the
say
film,
that.
right?
He
Yeah.
did say that.
Here's what happened.
He said. Did he say that?
Yeah.
Did he say it to you, or did he say it to someone else?
No, to me. He can
he
say
said
anything
before
to
this
me.
movie, nothing about you interested me.
Such a lie.
How could you say that?
Charlie, listen, can I just
Charlie.
tell you
This is
something?
unbelievable.
I did say that, but she did
Why?
no, I wrote.
Was this for a fact? I mean,
Here's the truth.
my appreciation of you is
Diminishing quickly.
diminishing rapidly.
Here's what happened. Here's the truth of what happened.
I mean, it didn't take Jude
You need to be teased.
Cold
my
Mountain in
darling.
order to appreciate her. Did it? No.
I did I
Never even
saw.
heard of me.
Please, just let me
Never
say
heard
this
of her.
one thing now, because we're getting completely out of hand
Yes,
here.
yes.
I saw a movie by a fantastic director called Alejandro Amenabar called The Others.
Right.
And I loved this movie so much that I wrote an article for the New York Times about it. And I was watching this film again and again as I was writing my piece. And I thought, you know what? She's amazing. For the first time, I realized how amazing that she was, because I just watched this
But
performance so
prior
carefully.
to that-
And then I went back. And I watched.
Most of us want to know what took you so long.
Okay, okay.
No, but so what? You all of a sudden you realized from
I
the others
completely
that
understand
And then I
that.
went back and I looked at Moulin Rouge, and I thought, okay, I get it, To Die For. And I suddenly thought, this is an extraordinary actress at the top, absolutely at the top of her game. And then there was just a personality issue to get over. But apart from that, I thought she
what
was
the personality issue?
so much trouble. No, listen, we did
What
this.
did you-
Mischievous,
when he
mischievous.
called you up-
I'm terribly mischievous.
Yes, you are. When
Okay,
he-
guys,
when
come
he
on.
When he called you up, did you say yes, or did you say, well, let me talk to my agent, let me talk,
Well,
look
no,
at the script?
we sat down for a meal. We had an Italian meal, and so within 45 seconds we were like, ah. Yeah,
Done.
and it was
Done.
It was-
Well, no, he doesn't do that really.
No,
he
you-
sort of
in other
takes
words-
a breath and thinks.
Oh, you go home and think
Don't-
about it.
I
Am I
hate this
wrong?
interview. I was
No,
so
this
looking
is-
forward to doing Charlie Rose, and it's turned into a
I'm so
character
sorry.
assassination.
Not at all. I think that this is a virtue. I'm about to.
Exactly. I think it was a virtue, too. I mean, go carefully. This is a great story. We don't want to miscast it, do we?
Listen, I was...
And you cast a triangle. You
I
didn't
did.
cast,
I did.
which I think is really smart, because you're casting three people who are going to be able to interact and balance each other based on what you think.
I think the interesting about the casting is more than, I mean, he seems obvious to me, and she does too, is I wouldn't necessarily have known Renee was right for this role.
right.
you?
No. Well, I sort of.
You would have.
I was desperate for her to do it.
Really?
Yeah.
What did you see that made her so, I mean, because this is out of character of anything that I've seen her do.
But that's what she is. I mean, she's
That's
so
defines
in terms
good.
of she's so versatile. I mean, she just comes in and she's so bold. I mean, I hugged her after the premiere and I just said to her, you're brave, because she just jumped in there, didn't she? And she didn't have any qualms. She didn't have any vanity. She just did it.
She did. That's true.
And she does that time and time again.
I mean, she's the most serious comic actress I know, and the
It's a great
funniest serious
description.
actress. And I think that she was a revelation.
That's so true.
Yeah.
It is serious. Let me just take us back here and go to the film for a moment. This is where the initial meeting between Inman and Ada Monroe, or at least an early meeting in the mountains of North Carolina before he goes off to war. Here it is. You can't resist Bach, can you?
Well, that's Gabriel Yared, my composer, but it's obviously in the spirit of he and I love Bach, and we play.
That's what I mean. I mean,
we play Bach
you
together.
find a way to get some
I
kind
remember
of.
when you were in the dairy farm and when you called me and said we've just
Listen
written
to
that.
this.
Yeah.
I mean,
Over the
Gabriel.
phone. Was
Gabriel
that-
comes down
They'd just
to
written
work with
Ada's
me,
thing.
and he improvises and I improvise, and we play, and because I started off as a musician, and we play, and he found this piece of music, and I called Nicole and said, you must listen to this. This is the music
over
you're going
the
to play
phone,
in
I
the
heard
field.
this sort of, them picking away at the piano with these notes, and it even read through then.
There was the piano a part of the book. I've forgotten.
Yeah.
It was. So
It's mentioned in, I think, it's so long since I read the book, but I think it's a tangential part of Ada's character, and it seemed to me to be the key to her, where her voice was.
Yeah. You have said this, and I wonder if is there a notion that this walk is atonement for him? You know,
Oh,
that
absolutely.
somehow this is what this is about.
Absolution through walking.
Yeah, exactly.
And symbolic too, if you like, of the journey he's making in his own head and his own heart, away from the battle, away from death, towards life. I mean, you mentioned earlier this sense of this love, this everlasting love, this love that they're both striving for. And it's interesting that, based on such a brief encounter or a fleeting moment or a bag of diamonds, as Inman puts it, the love suddenly symbolises, in a way, life. And in my opinion, Inman and his love for her, or his love for life, is what he is walking towards, to try and find life in himself again and love in himself again. And indeed, I think you could say the same maybe for Ada, that her survival, or her ability to adapt, to change, to survive, is again to survive and exist, to live.
It is amazing, the evolution in all of the characters, certainly the principal three we're talking about here.
Well, there's an interesting thing, the question you ask about home, about finding your way home and what you have to do to earn the right to get home, and what home is, because there is a Cold Mountain, as you know very well. But also Cold Mountain was a spiritual destination in Buddhist poetry. And so it has this other metaphor, which is that life is a journey for some kind of redemption. What is redemption? Is redemption through love? Is redemption through purging yourself of your sins? So there's always this sort of stereo effect of the story. Everybody trying to make a journey to find home. Home is a loved one. Home is absolving yourself. I mean, what Inman has seen, he's so ashamed of what he's seen, because this war, the more I read about it, the more I studied it, the more I thought about it, was such an unconscionable event. I mean, it's one of those circumstances, it seems to me, where you say, well, there's a just cause, perhaps, and that there were many heroes, definitely, but this is the kind of place to solve problems like this, I think. You know, not with the perfunctory solution of a gun or the shot of a bayonet or a mortar charge, but like this, you know, and the film is making such a plea for that.
Yeah, too often in war starts when talking stopped. Too early.
Absolutely. It's a virus of violence that people catch.
One of you said, in something I read, and I'm not sure who said it, it may have been you, that this film has relevance to today, from a standpoint that war, we go to war and we do not know, and it's happening to us today as a nation in Iraq. Consequences that were unforeseen, staying longer than we anticipated, divisions within...
Families being torn apart.
Yeah, families torn apart.
Sort of different lands being
and taking much longer than you ever imagined.
And scarred.
We worked very hard on that together towards the end of the film, of making sure that we got that properly articulated, didn't we?
Yeah, it was interesting how the letters came about, right? Ada's letters.
Yeah, well, tell me about that.
No, we just tried to make sure that first of all, you kept this filament of connection between Inman and Ada, but also that the film's resonance with the present was clear, because it wasn't... I don't think it's interesting to make a history film which is like a tribute to the Smithsonian, you know. It's only important if it tells us something about the way that we live now and the problems we have now. And the sad fact is, whenever we release this film, there'll be some conflict somewhere in the world. There'll be some tragic rhyme with what this film is about.
Yeah, it also reminds you of Santana, who said, "Those of us who forget history will certainly relive it.
Yeah.
You know, if we forget the lessons of history,
it
will visit us again." This is is it fair to say this is a kind of you stepping into a leading man role in all that Hollywood stuff and all that it means? Or do we care? You know, in other words, you're stepping up where you have more responsibility.
Yes, I suppose so. It certainly is not sort of a decision or the end of a long a long plot that I've been weaving.
Yeah, but you has you in any way?
It's just the kind of parts that have interested me in the past, and the projects that have come my way have been more often than not cameos and smaller parts, and I was blessed that the piece that came my way that seemed to be the right piece and the right part to take on board with all that responsibility was in the hands of Anthony, someone I knew I could trust and had great faith in and felt safe with.
I mean, you weren't looking forward to it. You weren't necessarily anticipating. You weren't pushing back from it. It would just happen at a certain point that you'd be offered a role that seemed to fit for you.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
All right, roll tape. Here's more. It'll give you much more sense of the relationship before the war between these two people. Here it is. We're going to show something that Charles Frazier did in a moment, reading from Coal Mountain, it's so that the audience at home knows that there was this remarkable book that did it win something big?
National Book Award.
National Book Award, which is as big as it gets.
Yeah.
And it was his first novel, as I remember.
Only novel.
His only novel. And he's been struggling since then to figure out exactly what the next.
What an announcement of the talent it was. That book. I mean, it became an instant classic.
It's almost
you
like,
go to the South. I'm sure when you go home and people just say it's like they feel it's their book. It's the most incredible thing.
They do. Yeah. I mean, and the other thing about it for him is that there were a lot of young writers that just cheered him on because they're people that are teaching, and struggling and writing at the same time. They haven't sort of found the right story or haven't completed their story, and he did.
And it also tells the story of a lot of families in that part of the world who still remember, and some of the abuses of the Home Guard, which I think still run very, very deep in that part of the world.
Which reminds me, that's the one part of the violence of the Home Guard, of the Home Guard and the people who track down the deserters, one and the same sometimes,
Militia,
And, Tell me about how exacting is your historical retelling of the Battle of Petersburg?
Well, Dante Ferretti, who's the production designer on this film, who did a miraculous job. I mean, he and Anne Roth in the costumes, what they do before they go to work is really bracing to see how much they prepare. And we had a lot of military advisors. We went to Petersburg, we measured out every square inch of the battlefield and then removed it 6,000 miles to outside of Bucharest.
Yeah. And the soldiers are Romanian.
The soldiers are Romanian, but the dimensions of that crater, the amount of gunpowder, all of it's as accurate as we dared make, and it was a shocking thing to be part of. I mean, as Jude said the other day, we're pretending to be in this battle, but nevertheless it was the most intense few days of shooting I've ever had in my life. I mean, not simply because of the numbers of people, but just the sense of standing over a pit and realizing that 140 years ago, real cannons, real mortars, real men with rifles looked down and they were these guys crammed together like sardines and then just...
It reminded you of war. I mean, all the way up through World War I, that whole notion of war, which was just people coming together face to face.
Yeah.
And knowing that death was most likely certain.
Poor men fighting a rich man's war. I mean, one of the strange things, if you had 10 or more slaves, you were exempt from battle.
Before, is that right?
I didn't know that.
It has always been true. This has probably, just guessing, the toughest film ever to make because of the conditions in Romania and being outside and all of that. It was colder than you can imagine.
We wanted the Four Seasons and we got it.
I wanted the Four Seasons Hotel.
I mean, we got heat,
summer.
extreme heat, we got rain, we got, and by the end we got extreme cold.
Yeah, but he has paid tribute to all of you, saying that you've never had a better. That other people, you wouldn't have had a movie because other people wouldn't necessarily have been able to endure
what they put up with. The odd thing about these guys is the harder it got, the happier. I got less and less happy. They got more and more happy. I mean, Jude is buried, shot, drowned, dragged, beaten, and he'd just say more.
It was lovely being there. We were sort of...
Didn't know it was masochistic.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. This is Charles Frazier reading from his book, and then we'll move on to other things. Here it is.
Ada left the porch and walked down past the barn into the pasture. The sun was long gone below the ridgelines, the light falling fast. The mountain stood gray in the dusk, as pale and insubstantial as breath blown on glass. The place seemed inhabited by a great force of loneliness. Even the old-timers talked of the weight that bears down on a person alone in the mountains at that time of day. Worse even than full dark on a moonless night, for it is at twilight that the threat of dark makes itself felt most strongly. Ada had sensed that power from the beginning and complained of it. She remembered Monroe had tried to reason that the isolate feeling did not arise from this particular ground, as she claimed. It was nothing unique to her or to the place, but was an element of common life. Only a very simple or a very hard mind might not feel it, in the way that some rare constitutions are insensitive to heat or cold. As with most things, Monroe had an explanation. He said that in their hearts, people feel that long ago God was everywhere all the time. The sense of loneliness is what fills the vacuum when he pulls back 1 degree more remote.
We have talked about this before, But is Ada in any way a continuation of? Is there some common? You know what I'm asking. Is there some common denominator? If you look at the others, and if you look at Ada in this movie, you play women that are strong but accessible. You know, help me out here. I can't. I'm looking for a better question, but that's as good as I can get. Help me out.
What was the question?
The question is there some connection between these characters you play? Do we see some? If he had looked at all the roles that you had played, like he did the other, what would you see coming out together? Would you see any linkage there or not? Do you see her? Do you see Nicole in every role? Or is she so?
Look, unfortunately, this is a woman who's got everything, and she's which is why she's hateful, because she looks the way she does.
Yes,
she's as smart as she is. She's investigative as she is, and she's as honest as she is as a man. And she's tortured. And she's actually irrelevantly tall, which I think is something we can find is wrong with her. There's no point in being that tall.
All right, take a look at this. This is another. We have talked about how great Renee Zellweger is in this film, and I also should pay tribute to Hoffman, Philip Seymour Hoffman. I should pay tribute to Elaine Atkins.
And
I should
Natalie.
pay tribute to Natalie Portman.
Kathy Baker, Donald Sutherland,
Thomas
Ray
Sutherland.
Winston. It's just
How did you get all these people to come to Romania and
lied
to them?
But that's such a good question, because how do you get that many actors to say yes, even to small roles? And the answer to that is a great screenplay. And a great screenplay. I mean, you look at the director, and he happens to be the director and the writer. So, and it gets lost. The screenwriting gets lost because he is the director. You forget that he did this extraordinary screenplay that everybody just read and went, what do I have to do? Am I right?
You're a writer. Yeah. I mean, did you go to him, Jude, and say, I think, listen, Inman is more this than that, and we need to change these lines?
Funnily enough, I don't think we ever talked about specifics with him, and it was always a discussion about a sort of spiritual sense of where he was at on his journey, or the place he was at in his soul, if you like, and what he was looking for in others. I didn't have any lines to change.
The funniest thing is
you didn't have that many lines.
You talked about casting Nicole. Casting Jude was much more funny in the sense that because
he wouldn't read the script.
Well, because he
wouldn't read the script.
I've teased him about this. He was doing a play, much to his. I mean, it's very, very good because he wasn't to be distracted. But I kept saying, "Well, has he read the script? Would somebody get him to read it?"
But it was more.
No, he's in the middle of a play. It's very serious. He won't be distracted.
It was more complicated than that. We're friends. And I love.
You and Jude are since Ripley.
Look at you getting teased now.
No, we were friends from before Ripley.
Before Ripley, yeah.
And we did Ripley. It was an amazing experience. And then, you know, it's much different. If you don't know an actor when you're casting them, you can have a proper conversation. You can walk away from it. I can walk away from it. If there's somebody who's your neighbour and your pal and you've worked together before, what do you do? Yeah, so we had lots of intermediaries calling saying, if I were to come to London, were to sit down with him, would he be willing to? And it was the most.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, it was hilarious. Before we would actually sat in a room together.
All right, roll tape. Here is Renee, the much promised Renee Zellweger, when she arrives at Black Cove, sent by people because her father had died. She's in this house and she knows nothing. She, being Ada, played by Nicole, and help is on the way. Ruby, played by Renee Zellweger. Here it is. Here is what I would like to see. This is what I would love to see. And I wonder if you've seen it or you've seen it. There was a 5-hour cut.
5 hours and 6 minutes.
And 6 minutes, which wasn't just a rough cut. This was better than a rough cut.
Oh, I don't know if it was better than a rough cut. Jude saw it.
You saw it. 5 hours.
You saw 5 hours.
It ended up 2.5, folks. 2.5 is what it ended up. Was it?
That's glorious.
Was it? So what did you leave out? That if you could go to the 5-hour, if they came to you and said, we need 25 more minutes, you won't play this with me.
No, I'll play it with you only because the truth is that I get Final Cut in my films, and that the whole process for me is organic. And I would be horrified I mean, I think if a director's got director's cut, then the film ought to be the film that he wants or she wants to release. And my mother, you know, makes sugo, makes Italian sauce. And on a Friday, she puts the tomato on the stove, and then on Sunday it's ready to eat. And it's just boiling and boiling down. But obviously in the process, extraordinary moments of acting, of shooting, lots of effort, you know, is thrown away. And that's sad, but it's tragic but not serious.
But would you not want, I mean, on a DVD or somewhere, you don't want anybody ever to see that, because the 2.5 hours is your Cold
I think
Mountain.
it's the best version of Cold Mountain. I mean, it just as a novelist might write 400 more pages than the...
Okay, but more questions. Is your... are you saying this because you think it's the best version, understanding the dynamics of the marketplace, understanding an audience sitting in a room watching, that's for all those considerations, or are you saying that, you know...
How do you know that? I don't know how to disinter that question. I think it's the best version I could find that would speak to an audience in a room. You know, it's not...
I don't have any argument with that.
No.
Except
Good.
I'd love to see the 5 hours.
Well, we'll come one day when you're in London.
All
I'll
right,
subject you to it.
Soon. The interesting thing about his performance is that it seems to me, there is the balance between, on the one hand, and I'm asking whether this came about in acting, weariness, just weariness. Almost the point of wanting to say, it's over, I'm too tired. And on the other hand, this thing that burns inside of you to see one more time this face. There's the balance between those two, or not.
I think in that is the contradiction of the will to survive, even when, in a way, what you really want is just to lie down and die. And it goes back to what I was saying about his love of her and his need to have that love recognised or reciprocated is also symbolic of his desire to find life in himself. It's interesting too that whilst the challenges that are put in front of him, the tasks, if you like, are defeating sometimes, they're also, in a strange way, steps to awakening, steps to waking up. And whilst they add more grief and more pain onto his shoulders, in a strange sense, when he gets home, he is complete.
I know exactly what you mean.
I do.
You do too. Yeah.
So it was more about, it's more about what they bring to each other.
The dream was fulfilled.
And that's why,
the dream was fulfilled.
Not even the dream, the promise, I suppose.
The promise.
And the expectation, the promise from another person. And the longing for another person. And that person will always be with you no matter where they end up.
When you were here last, you said that you live to feel the kind of emotion she felt for this character. But that is the nature of Nicole, to live for that kind
to
of...
feel.
Yeah,
I
to
mean,
feel
I'm not
that
going
kind of...
to, I mean, I think it's very easy when you get into a position where you're scrutinized, where you're sort of the center of something that you don't quite understand anyway, to close down and to shut down, partly because you say, I'm not going to trust, and I would much prefer to be someone that trusts than not trust. I'd much prefer to be someone that feels than watches.
So where are you now? I mean, have you gotten to the point where you can trust and feel and not someone...
I think I've always remained that way.
You have.
I mean,
You never lost that.
And I think what it does is it means you leave yourself exposed and vulnerable and raw. And
but the risk is worth it.
I think so.
Because to forego that and somehow...
Yeah, but I said to Anthony early on, because he said to me, well, you know, when you become really well known and everything, what was it? Remember you were sort of challenging me on the ability to then go and act, to get lost in a particular...
Well,
because you're constantly being...
But you scrutinised, but you said an amazing thing, which is you said that you felt most yourself when you were pretending to be somebody else. When you were finding yourself in somebody else on a film
because
set.
It's so safe. At that, because he said, well, how can you reveal yourself? And I said, no, it's actually, that's where you can reveal yourself.
Because it's safe.
Which is why I don't like having EPKs on the set, or a writer, or somebody who's not within the very small group, because you immediately enter into an agreement, really a tacit agreement, because it's never quite discussed. But it's saying, I'm going to give you so much of myself, and I'm going to trust that you won't abuse it, and that you won't take advantage of it. And I so desperately want to give you that now. And so if there's anybody else outside that circle privy to it, that's when I start to become like, and that closes me down. So I hate having a documentary filmmaker on the set making a film of the film or something like that. It doesn't seem right.
I think she's absolutely right. You know,
It's about
that we
mutual
live
surrender.
to want to trust and to want to be as open as we can, don't you?
Absolutely.
You know, and there's everybody there is always in the society and culture we live in people who are just waiting, you know, to twist it, you know, or to exploit it, or to take advantage of it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, so
I think also when one's put in a position as either as an actor or as a director to go back and explain your actions and explain the process. You said something so wonderful, which is that filmmaking is a forward motion, and if those agreements are in place and everyone feels comfortable and safe, as indeed we three did, and the whole family that Anthony put together did, there is no process. It's just an experience, isn't it?
Yeah.
And communal experience, and therefore to go back and say, you know, how and what did you do to prepare for this scene or to prepare just for the role is an unanswerable question, because there's almost no memory of that.
Yeah.
It's
but
momentum.
the other question is that if you create that kind of relationship on a set, and does it forever with you? In other words, is there kind of bonding that takes place? Or
I mean,
is it
not
of the
always.
moment?
Not always. I
Not
think in
always.
this instance, absolutely. I think, you know, some things become fundamentally a part of you, and I think for me that this
And who normally sets a tone? Is it the director that normally sets that tone, or is it the lead actor, or could it be anybody that creates the tone that will be the culture of a movie set?
Definitely the director.
Yeah.
Definitely the actors. No, I mean, listen, we will be friends for the rest of our lives as a result. I mean, I can say that with absolute confidence. So the connection that we had was so intense and unique.
But that happened too with Michael, didn't it? You and
Michael's-
Michael Ondaatje, obviously,
I just spoke to him before I walked in this door.
that he was jealous he wasn't going to be here.
What was so strange is that when I met you, and I mean, Michael's one of my favourite authors,
Yeah. And
you
what
know,
is
and I
the-
still haven't met him.
He was there last night. You know, I mean, Michael is as you know, is a remarkable person, and that relationship will. They do survive. Saul's aunts. Well, the fact that Sydney and I met through a movie, and now we're partners.
What did you meet through?
We met on Ripley because he was one of the producers.
Oh, that's right.
And now
Name
I'm
producer
now,
Sidney Pollack is one of the producers
yeah,
of this
and now
movie.
I'm partners with him in the company. And
Mirage or
And I'm
something.
going
What's
to
it
do a
called?
film with them.
now
So we're all
now
like-
You're going to do another film?
yeah.
with
What are you doing?
with Sydney directing. It's called The Interpreter. So that's
What
my
is that? What's
next
The
film.
Interpreter?
It's the title of the film he's going to direct
What
me
is
in.
it? Can you tell me?
Well, it's a political thriller, really.
Oh, that's
isn't
that's
it?
why I'm excited about it already.
Set at the
Yeah.
UN.
Yeah.
It's set at the UN?
Yeah.
An original work, or is it based on an original work? Okay, not based on a book. It's a screenplay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me get one more scene here, because Jude will be the first to agree with me. I mean, the dynamic of this film is the story of these two people. The two great dynamics. One is the story between these two people who are far apart and hoping to come together, you know, despite war and despite desertion, and that the fact that on the home front there is this extraordinary two people who need each other in a desperate way. And would not survive without each other. And that's what happens here as two people who could not, one from Charleston who spoke several languages and plays the piano, and the other who knows how to run a farm, roll tape. When you did this, is it the film that you hope to make?
Absolutely, and more.
And more?
Yeah. Because I think before I started, I wasn't quite. I didn't see the full extent and the chambers beneath the surface, the resonance that it would conjure, and
You know, while the making of in the making of the movie, or
Well, in the making of it, they
revealed
revealed themselves to me in my own personal journey.
Right.
I think in the journey of Inman, and in the journey, in my opinion, of all the other actors now that I've seen it. And interestingly enough, hearing Anthony talking about the final cut, I did see a 3-hour version, or a version just over 3 hours, and I loved it, and I loved seeing more of everything we'd done, and I loved seeing more of the full extent of what we'd done. But I love this version because this is the version in which, in a way, the voice of the film, the voice of the heart of this piece sort of sings, and it's almost like through compression, its voice has sort of come out, permeated finally, without having to lean on anyone other than itself.
Did this movie and the ideas in all of this have some profound effect on your life and how you thought about life?
Absolutely. It was the first part I think I've ever played that I wanted to learn from and hoped would rub off on me. Yeah. And it's often you play, some of the best roles force you to investigate sides of yourself that you hate, or face up to sides of yourself that you perhaps put away. This was a character that inspired me to discover sides of myself that I didn't necessarily think were there, but were a brighter side of myself, a more
Was it risk-taking and things like that, or what? Go ahead.
A more simple side of myself. Was it risk-taking? No, it was more. It wasn't risk-taking. It was more exposing, and it was like incredibly therapeutic, and I felt cleansed at the end of it.
That says it all. I mean, that's what art does, if you can get caught up in it in the right way. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you can, in a sense, it ought to give us some insight about how we live our lives and to deal with ourselves and to be able to approach. And you said an interesting thing to me, which was that, things that you may or may not like about yourself. Not specific what you did or did not like about yourself, but if in fact we can engage in experiences that help us face up to those kinds of things.
What is fiction for?
What is fiction for?
If it's not
an ultimate truth.
If it's not to nudge our perspective, particularly dramatic fiction, not to nudge our perspective slightly. If it's not a bank balance we can all go and borrow from, which tells us something new about ourselves or about the world. If it doesn't try and aspire to that, we shouldn't waste our time making it.
See, what turns me on about that idea is just that the whole notion, first of all, it's about commerce and it's about what we do, but at the same time, it is about adding to your own personal journey. If in fact, I mean, how lucky all of us are, and you guys in a special way, which Jude just talked about, to be engaged in something that'll help you understand yourself more. Mm-hmm. At the same time, having all the benefits that come from doing it, satisfaction from performance and all of that other stuff, because you are dealing with things that help you define
and
self.
I think the thing that takes that out of the realm of self-indulgence is that you're reaching out with it. You're not saying, actually, this is just for me. It's actually saying, I'm reaching out with this. I'm willing to sort of expose myself so that maybe that, as you said, nudges other people. So that I suppose you're trying to be generous with it rather than hold on to it for
I should
yourself.
also take note of the fact that you have two of the terrific films that are in terms of performance. One is Dogville, which has got an award of some kind somewhere, and
Russia,
also
actually.
in Russia. Where was it? Did you go and accept?
I didn't.
You did. And the other was Human Stain, which with Anthony Hopkins, in which you also play a character that it shows what we talked about earlier.
The range.
The range. Yeah, range. And you said something that's interesting to me too. Is that it is that is what it is all about for you. If you couldn't do that, you would die.
Yeah, I suppose it's just being able to
test
play.
Yourself.
Yeah, and explore all different women. I'm in a position now where I get the chance to play an array of women, and I'm very, very privileged because of that. And so to be able to play, and particularly, I grew up with novels. That's the reason I became an actor, is I used to, lie in bed and read and want to be these people. and now I get to be these people. So
you said change is what you want to do as an actor. My spirit would be broken if I couldn't do it. And this has also touched me, you know, and all of us feel it. You don't want to be on your deathbed thinking about what my life could have been. You know, that's true about all of us. You know, which is part of what you're saying too. I think in terms of what you learn from movies. On December 25th, Cold Mountain opens. An extraordinary cast, extraordinary performances, brilliantly directed. It is a film that will touch many of us in terms of the ideas that it deals with, and we've been honored to enjoy the company of these three people this evening. Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next time.